Good morning, Executive Insight listeners. I'm your host, John Suguitan, and we're back for another exhilarating session discussing the top trends, emerging technologies, and the industry challenges in this growing economy. Today is a special day. We are joined by a seasoned veteran. He is a global executive technology leader in the pharmaceutical and manufacturing industry. He's got decades of experience, and I'd love to introduce him in the podcast today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ken Kumar. Ken, welcome to the Executive Insight Podcast.
Good morning, John. Thank you for having me today on the program.
Wonderful, wonderful. How are you doing today, by the way?
Great. It's a wonderful day here. It's a little bit on the colder side, but wonderful. Snow on the ground, but it's a perfect day, and excited to have this conversation with you here, John.
Perfect. Well, let's get heated up then and jump right into some of these conversations. Ken, you've been an industry leader for a couple of decades now, and you've seen multiple trends and industry changes as your experience gone on. But within the next 12 to 18 months, what are the top three challenges that your industry you think you're going to be facing coming into 2019?
Great question, Don. Thinking through this, I would bucket this into three separate areas in our industry. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the research and the development side. On the research side, typically it's which molecules are the most effective to be able to move into the development space, which biosimilars have most potential to pursue. Moving right on to the clinical space, how do we really accelerate this whole clinical development process? Because the time to market is all about that in terms of being able to get the valid drug in the patient's hands, obviously the most effective and in a safe way. So that I would say is the first challenge that the industry faces. The second challenge, I would bucket that under the whole supply chain aspect of it. In our industry, the co-meds and comparators play a big role in terms of validating the efficacy of the drug. How do co-meds and comparators with the actual drug perform? So the supply chain of these co-meds, the comparators, where do they come from? What the costs involved are in terms of monitoring that. That's a very big thing. And going back to the whole supply chain aspect as well. So is the data coming in from the contract manufacturing organizations, what we call CMOs, in terms of the data that comes in, the inventory, or where are we at in the actual manufacturing process, for example. And also the serialization plays a big role as well. In terms of the serialized data, as the regulation is moving more and more end-to-end from the actual supply chain of the drug. The third aspect that that comes to my mind as we speak here, I would say is the data is available, but in many cases is fairly decentralized. It exists in different buckets, in different departments. We already talked about the CMOs and different third-party organizations within this contract manufacturing organizations, the 3PLs, the third-party logistics, or the CRO, the contract research organizations, and the different departments within the industry. Centralization or consolidation of the data, or essentially if you could get into a data lake, you could do wonders with that. So I think that's a very important challenge moving on to the technology space in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I think data will have a big part in 2019 in not just collecting it and having to harness this information, but really where do you have it centralized? Where do you have the data utilized as an organization? Because in the end of the day, you don't want to just be collecting data to collect data, right? You want to monetize it. You want to utilize it as something that's valuable for the organization, which kind of brings up a really good question on my end here. You mentioned regulation and having to have all of these factors come into play. You've worked for global organizations. How has Europe's GDPR rules and similar laws within the U.S. really have impacted over the last 12 to 18 months?
Great question there again, John. We come from a highly regulated industry. There are many regulations that apply to our industry under the FDA, the 21 CFR Part 11 for validations, the HIPAA, the DSCSA we spoke about for serialization. GDPR is the next version from a privacy standpoint. Obviously, some of the precursors that we have already been complying with are the Safe Harbor, Privacy Shield. But with the GDPR becoming effective recently, that has also made significant practical impact in the industry. In terms of, the regulations are very strict, at least it started out obviously from the EU standpoint, and in terms of what data we are accountable for. And I'll talk about a little bit about some of the practical aspects of implementing a GDPR strategy and actually executing on it. So mostly it has been translating into having someone in the role of a chief privacy officer. It doesn't have to be a full-time chief privacy officer role. In many cases, it's some part-time role, somebody performing the chief privacy officer role, having that responsibility for this aspect of it. The other important practical aspect of this, the other aspect is the whole data architecture. Being able to understand where the data is, where the different data segments are, and which ones have the information. For example, the HCP, the physician's data, the healthcare practitioner data, or which ones have the patient data, or which ones have the employee social security number in there, and which ones, obviously all this is more impactful for people with EU background, but in a global sense, it could apply to anybody for that matter. So that's the whole understanding the data architecture, where these data resides and how we should be able to manage that data. The third aspect of this is, I would say, we started seeing a more detailed review for privacy on the MSAs and the SOWs with vendors in terms of having a privacy aspect put in, because there are many data which is under the control of vendors, be it technology vendors, be it managed services vendors that they are accountable for. A more detailed, harder look has to be factored in on the MSA, the Master Services Agreement, the SOW. The fourth thing that comes to my mind is many companies have probably already started on this evolution, is the whole encryption and masking. The data has, the database encryption is a very big thing. You have to have it encrypted, and this also ties in back to the whole secure and masking of the lower level environments, in terms of the redaction or masking of that data, so the access is limited. So these, I would say, this is more converting the whole regulation into more of a practical aspect and the implications of where the industry is and where we're going right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of hit that spot on with the evolution of these hybrid roles that needs to be created for, I don't want to say challenges, right? Because I think in the grand scheme of things, GDPR is just going to enhance our security and keep our privacy at a better stand within the economy as we grow and innovate in multiple industries. With that being said, there's a lot of changes going on, especially in 2018, right? We found a lot of niche companies that's making a splash within the technology community. I guess coming into 2019, what do you see as the big next tech distributor, or I should say disruptor, if anything?
Right, John. So the couple of things stick out in my mind as the next big tech disruptors, and I might have to get a little bit more technical here as you're talking technology, obviously. So let me talk about the first one that comes to my mind is, I would say, cloud transformation. This has fundamentally changed the industry from back in the day that everybody will be working on these big machines that are in-house and the infrastructure that's in-house. Today, it's very easy to spin things off in the cloud, be it, and also minimize your footprint on the infrastructure. So the whole cloud transformation in terms of how things are going forward from here on. Today, that takes into the form of, let's say, an infrastructure as a cloud, what I would call an IaaS, or a platform as a service, PaaS, or a software as a service. So you have various levels of cloud transformation, the software as a service being the highest in the food chain, if I could call it that. And today with the orchestration that can take place with Kubernetes and Docker and things of that nature, it's very easy for me to sit right here and spin off something in the cloud and be able to harness the compute power. So I would say that's a very big tech disruptor from the way in which we have been doing business, technology business traditionally. The other important thing that really sticks out in my mind is the AI and ML, the artificial intelligence and machine learning component, to be able to leverage the data. In the past, the mathematical algorithms have always been there historically, but we've not been able to leverage that. Now we got so much more compute power, so much more storage, so much more memory. The things have optimized that we are able to run these large algorithms, have the machines learn it, but be supervised, unsupervised, or deep learning. And I talk a little bit more a little later, hopefully, in our discussion, if I could, about some of the applications of this. But the robotic process automations, chatbots, that's fundamentally, I would say, a very big tech disruptor going into 2019, something that I believe that every industry should take advantage of moving forward here, John.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned machine learning and AI. I think we are moving into a more cognitive technology world, and I think having to adapt these new emerging trends and technologies to be more applicable for efficiency is a big step forward, not just from the pharmaceutical and manufacturing space, I'm sure that's going to be heavily utilized, but cross-vertically, right? I think in finance, having to have a smarter system to communicate amongst each other will be a fantastic tool to have moving forward. With that being said, then, a lot of people kind of thrown the term digital transformation this past year, and I think it's unfortunate because there's no set way of describing it, that if you were to probably ask 15 of your peers what they thought digital transformation is, you'd probably get 15 different answers, right? So I guess more of a direct question to you, how do you think digital is impacting our world?
John, so you kind of led from the last one there to where I talk a little bit more about the whole digital space and how I see it. And you mentioned not just in industry, but even in finance, that obviously sticks around a familiar chord. A simple example in finance, and I'll then come back to digital, would be many times the purchase orders and the goods receipts and the invoices that come in terms of the match. I would call it the three-way match or the two-way match. Many of these manual tasks, and they can be done by robots, or in terms of making those three-way matches and being able to say, hey, here are the ones that doesn't match. So that would be an example of finance. But going back to your question on the whole digital space, what exactly is that? And I want to talk a little bit across industry, if I could. It has multiple applications. I mean, the word for an automobile word, I think, is the word of self-driven cars is coming fast, and it's almost there. It's more of a culture change, and in terms of perfecting the technology, and in terms of people adapting to it, I think those are parts that are remaining. But you can see more and more cars that have started to come out, for example, I believe there was a situation of a driver in California where he literally fallen asleep, and the cops could pull him over after being behind him, where the car was pretty much on autopilot. Mm-hmm. So I don't see the word going forward. I see that happening more and more from self-driven cars. Maybe the cars down in the future may even be networked with each other to know what exactly is going on. Coming to education, it could be life-changing the way education is delivered. Today, every kid is in a certain grade, learning material that is provided for consumption to that grade. But in terms of a targeted delivery, I see that tomorrow in tomorrow's classroom, probably, if I can imagine this, the grade, let's say middle school, 6th to 8th grade, may all be in one big classroom where each kid is getting their own targeted delivery of their education, because we know exactly where the child is in terms of their knowledge, in terms of what they need to be brought up to the next level. So it's one big classroom, and maybe the machines are the ones doing instructing, and there maybe not to eliminate the human aspect, obviously, because that never goes away. But maybe there's a couple of teachers in the classroom who go around the classroom helping out with these different aspects and whatnot. And coming to our industry, healthcare, that can be very much changing, if you will, from whole precision supply, precision delivery in terms of precision medicine right there. In the pharma world, hastening clinical trials. How do you make this go faster? How do you engage with which HCPs or doctors are you able to engage better? How do you make the patient enrollment faster? So in terms of providing the digital is all about providing the intelligence to be able to make those decisions faster. To sum it all up, essentially digital is, if you don't do it through paper, but being able to provide you better insights in a much faster way, bigger global definition of digital. I would say a subset of digital would be the whole artificial intelligence and machine learning journey, and being able to take advantage of the predictive analytics and the deep learning to be able to get insights into the data and being able to get a business advantage there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the applications are endless, right? And I'm glad that you utilize education as a great example there. I think when we start looking at digital transformation, since there is no set meaning and there's no set description, I think we can move past that and just everything is innovating, everything is digital, and in terms of transformation, as long as you're moving forward, it's a positive step forward. I have a question for you, Ken. You've had the pleasure of being on both sides of the house. You've been an end user. You've worked with organizations on the solution side. I think moving forward, the way that we grow as an organization is you have to look at your solution providers as partners as opposed to just one-offs. In your case, in your experience, what is your ideal business meeting like?
That's wonderful, because I always think through this, having had many business meetings with vendors, partners. I would say the top three things that I would look for in a business meeting there. One is the partnership with the vendor partnership, because to me it's a true partnership in being able to work seamlessly across. The second aspect that I would look for, John, is being able to provide the industry trends. To me, the question always in my mind is, what are some of the others doing? What's the other way of looking at it, maybe bring in some best practices from the industry. The third aspect that I would look for in the meetings typically is a product roadmap. If it's a technology vendor, what's the roadmap of the product? What is the innovation that's coming up? What are the key pain points that it might address on my side? So having said that, at a bigger picture, that I look for these top three levels always with all my partners. Specifically in a meeting, I like it to be productive, having an agreement at the end of the meeting, not just to meet just for the sake of meeting, but have an agreement at the end of the meeting and be conclusive. Hey, here are the action items. Here's what we're going to do. And I also believe in, being respectful of everyone's time and to start and close on time with the meeting. As against, if a certain amount of brainstorming and rambling is probably needed at that point, but at the end of the day, to be conclusive and start and close on time. Will be my top items for best practices with that's what I follow anyways with my different partners.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Ken, this has been an amazing chat. Your insight and your experience has been an absolute pleasure, and it's been valuable for us, absolutely. Unfortunately, that is our time for today. So first and foremost, I'd like to share my extreme gratitude to Ken Kumar for joining us today and sharing his executive insight. Ken, thank you for being a part of the podcast. Do you have some final thoughts for our listeners?
So as I think through our discussion, I would say the top two things that come to my mind are if you haven't leveraged the horsepower that we currently have available through the artificial intelligence and machine learning to take business advantage of things and begin your digital journey, this is the time in 2019 now to do it. The second thing that I would say as a closing thought that comes to my mind, if you're late stage to commercial biopharma and haven't really thought too much through technology, this is the time to really think through the technology strategy and the cost-effective implementations that would help you in terms of the clinical, in terms of the enterprise, in terms of the commercial aspects of it, in terms of putting the whole thing together, because that would provide the competitive advantage. Again, John, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I enjoyed this discussion very much. Thank you for making the time to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Your insights have been priceless, and hopefully our listeners out there are able to get some golden nugget of information regarding the evolution of technology and some of the ways that we're moving forward in 2019. With that being said, I'd love to thank our listeners as well. Today's discussion has been an absolute valuable insight in terms of the trends and the challenges that we're facing nowadays. And hopefully, regardless if you're an end user or a solution provider, you're able to get some positive feedback and some positive golden nugget of information from this chat. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at CDM Media. If you want to hear more about Ken and some of the other podcasts that I've had for this whole entire series, you can check us out at cdmmedia.com/resources, and you'll find our previous podcasts, CIO and CISO event testimonials, and also if you're keen on joining us in the future, you'll see our summit calendar for upcoming events. In the meantime, this is John Suguitan again from the Executive Insight Podcast. Thank you for joining us, Ken. And remember, in the tech table, you can always sit with us. Thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic day.